This is the big screen, and you can see we do have some cloud cover out there right now. Clouds, there's not going to be as many as yesterday, it looks like, but there's still going to be some clouds, and there's still a chance for a little bit of rain right now. What's interesting, though, is you look at the sky here, you can see these clouds with our sky camera from right here in downtown Sacramento, and we usually just show you the shot as it sits still. But we can actually move around and look at other areas. There's more to the sky than just what we see right here. And as we zoom out, we can zoom in. In fact, you can look out across the valley, and what do you see out there? There's Mount Diablo. And we can look around as we scan in other areas. The sky, not as cloudy in some spots and a little bit more cloudy in other areas. So when we look at our sky cameras, we're just looking through a little window. It's not the big picture. So it's nice to be able sometimes to just look around, scan the skies. And the best way to do that is to step outside. If you have a moment, step outside and look at what's going on around you. Look at the different types of clouds that are going on. Temperatures. Let's take a look at what the current temperatures are right now. We have 47 degrees in Sacramento, Stockton 50 degrees, 48 degrees in Modesto, and 26 degrees. That's pretty chilly around Lake Tahoe still. That's cold enough to keep that snow nice and crisp in the Tahoe area and in the surrounding mountains. So it's so nice to see that. But let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to start off by taking a look at one of the questions that we had last segment that we had. And we talked about hurricanes. And one of the questions was about, let me get my iPad here. We talked about hurricanes. Let's go ahead and take a walk across the studio. Maybe we can get it'd be neat to have a little bumper music as we walk across the studio here. But we were talking about hurricanes and how hurricanes form, and we talked about what created hurricanes. And one of the questions, there we go, we got some music. One of the questions we had was, why do hurricanes move? What is it that causes hurricanes to move? And that's really a pretty complex question. We have to go back a few levels to get to that point to actually describe what goes on with hurricanes. But we're going to do that. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what makes air move. Yesterday, we talked about what created winds, where you go from air moving from where there's more air to where there's less air. And that's what creates that movement of the air. And I actually got them. Thanks, Mike. I've got my glasses. In fact, I'm just going to leave them right there. And that really sets us up well as to what steering currents, what winds are moving the hurricanes around. So I made up a little demonstration for this. Let's go ahead and see if it'll work, okay? Let's go over to what we call the chroma key. We'll move over here and step into the magic world of chroma key. All right, what do I have here? Well, this is my bubble. Right here, this is a bubble of air. If you're a meteorologist, usually we call it a parcel of air. It's just a piece of air that we have, and it has its own characteristics that are unique to its own being. And we're gonna take a ride on this parcel of air. Now, you can't see air, can you? But we're going to be able to see this bubble, and we're also going to be able to see, this is our air right here. You can see these are all molecules that make up the air, and we blew them up so that you can see them a little bit better as we take our travels. So what we're going to do is we have the surface of the ground is being heated up by the sun. So the sun's over here. Hello, sun. And the rays of the sun come down and heat the earth. And so it's the earth that actually heats up. It's not the air right away. It's kind of like a hot plate. If you have a stove and you have the burner on, well, that's kind of like the surface of the earth. It heats things up. And when you put that pot on top of the burner, then the pot heats up. And so here we have the air that's sitting on top of the earth. The earth gets heated up, and then the air gets heated up. And as the air gets warmer, it starts to rise, and it creates a current of air that we see floating in the air. Now, we can't see the air until it gets to a certain temperature, but we are looking at that air as it moves up. In fact, I think we're going to see it grow, and here we go. Hold on, it's moving up. So that air, as it moves up, what happens is it gets colder and colder the higher you go. And this is an important term to remember. The higher you go, the colder it gets. Again, if you're going to be a future meteorologist, you really want to know about that and remember that. Tuck it away back here so you can bring it out if you use it in the future. Again, the higher you go, the colder it gets. That's why when you look over here at the mountain, you see snow on top of the mountain, and there's no snow at the bottom of the mountain. And so that tells me that it's colder on top of the mountain because that's where we have some ice and the snow. At the bottom of the mountain, it's much warmer. So the higher you go, the colder it gets, usually. And where that starts to change is when we reach a level called the stratosphere. And this is where it actually starts to warm a little bit as you go higher. So it's a difference in temperature from where we have the air below the stratosphere, which is called the troposphere, and the stratosphere where it actually changes, where it actually gets a little bit warmer. So our air molecules come up to this point, and this is like a lid. They bump into it. It's like a wall that keeps them from going much higher. And so all these little air molecules, as they bump into each other, they get kind of compressed a little bit. They get a little bit more dense, and they form an area of high pressure. Now, we all know, because we talked about this yesterday, that air moves from where there's more air to where there's less air. So here at this point in the stratosphere, there's more air. Over here, there's less air. So where's the air going to move? Where's it going to travel to? Well, it's going to move from where there's more to where there's less. So you have high pressure and you have low pressure. That air is moving from the high pressure to the low pressure. So it's moving along here just below the stratosphere. Now, as this air is up here, it's very cold. In fact, I'm a little chilly right now. This air starts to cool down. And as the air cools down, guess what happens to it? Well, it starts to drop. So warm air rises and the cold air, it sinks. And so it starts to drop down over the mountain and back down to the valley floor. And so what happens with that air? Well, there's more air now at the surface than there was up here. And so this is actually an area of high pressure because all of that air is sinking down to the surface of the earth. And as it bunches up at the surface, it creates an area of high pressure. So here we have more air at the base of the mountain, but there's less air over here. So where's the air going to go? You guessed it. It's going to move from where there's more air to where there's less air. And this creates something called a cell because this goes over and over again. The earth heats up the air, it rises up, it travels under the stratosphere and drops back down to the earth, and it creates what's called a cell. And this is important in describing the large-scale wind patterns of the earth. So let's talk a little bit more about that, and for that we need to go back over to the whiteboard. So here we are. It blew up since last time. It's much larger. So, all right, I'm going to stand. This is awesome. So let's talk about the cells and the weather pattern that we have. What part of the earth gets the most sunshine and gets the most energy from the sun? Well, it's right along its belt, the midsection. It's the equator. And that's where most of the sun's rays hit the earth. So that's where the earth gets most of its energy, and that's where it's very, very warm. And so if I draw a picture of the earth, let's do it this way. Oh, we got a big earth here. Here's the midsection right there. That's the equator. Where we get most of the sunshine is right here along the equator. So as it heats up the air, we just saw what happens to that air. Well, as the air, let's go over here. As the air gets heated up, it starts to rise. It goes up. And as it goes up, it bumps into the stratosphere and it starts to cool down. And it moves to where there's lower or less air. So we have more air here. We have an area of high pressure. And over here we have low pressure. And so it moves from high to low, and then it sinks down as it cools. And then we have it move back over here towards the equator. And so this is our cell. That's our cell that we created. And again, this is the earth. And I don't think I want to draw the whole earth again, but this is the earth. Here's the equator. Here's the North Pole. Here's the South Pole. This cell has a special name. It's actually called a Hadley cell. Hadley was an amateur meteorologist, and he was curious about the wind patterns of the earth. And we have, the easterlies, the trade winds, the westerlies, all of those different winds that help sailors, especially way back when with sailboats, to get around the earth. And so he came up with this idea, and it came out to be true. So we have cell, but it's more than just one cell. Because what happens is we get these cells that form, and so here we have air coming down, so this creates an area of high pressure, and then it goes to areas of low pressure, and then it rises up again, and so we get another cell. And then we get actually another cell here. And these cells also have names, and we have a Ferrel cell. I think of Will Ferrell when I think of that. And then we also have our polar cell that's up here. So we get these different cells of air that circulate around. And so with this being the case, what we have is we have the wind it's going towards the equator here. Let's draw these lines. Right here, and right here. I know this is a lot of information, isn't it? Go up here. So we have these lines, and we know that here, the wind is going from where there's the high pressure to where there's low pressure. And here it's going from where there's high pressure to where there's low pressure. And all along this line of high pressure, the wind is moving in this direction, away from the high pressure and towards the areas of low pressure. So on the Earth, you think, okay, well, look at that. The winds are all going towards the equator here, and they're all going away from the equator here, and then it's the same thing here. So you got the high pressure up here, you got the low pressure here, so the winds are going this way, and this way. Well, that works very well until you have to realize that, you know what, the Earth doesn't stay still, does it? The Earth is constantly revolving around. It's rotating around in a circle. And as that happens, what happens to the air? Well, it starts to bend a little bit. It starts to turn a little bit. And this is what's called the Coriolis Effect. And what it does is it has an effect on the wind to where it makes the wind deflect to the right. And so as it's traveling, it's going to move to the right. And so here you have it deflecting to the right. So if I'm in a plane flying with the wind and I turn to the right, so it goes this direction. So it's going to be traveling this way, and up here it's deflecting this way, and it's going this way, and it's going this way. And so you have some movement. And to explain that a little bit better, let's try to go over here. I've got another demonstration. And you can do this obviously at home. It should be pretty easy to do. I'm using the anchor desk. And so what I have is this little, looks like a little placemat that's going to give me a way to draw a circle a little bit easier than I would otherwise do it. Okay, I think we're going to have to go up because we're going to have to look down on this. So, camera number 2, if you're cooperating with me, look down on what I'm doing. So here's the center. This is the North Pole here at the top. I'm going to move this out of the way, this out of the way. I think we can do this. All right, we got camera number 3. Oh, there we go. We're looking over here, over here. All right, so as we look at this, hopefully from above, there we go, a little bit better. This is the North Pole. We're looking down on the Earth, okay? And this is the equator right here. And so we're going to be traveling from the North Pole to the equator. Now, I can draw a straight line, but we know that the Earth rotates. So the Earth rotates which way? Well, the sun comes up from this way and goes down this way, so it's going to rotate this direction. So if I'm going to be in a plane flying straight and the Earth is rotating, look what happens. It spins. And as the Earth spins, look what happens to my path of my plane. It starts to turn to the right. And that is called the Coriolis Effect. And so what this does, let's go back over here. It creates a pattern of winds that we have that are called, we have here the easterlies, because they're coming from the east, and you have the westerlies because they're coming from the west. And when we draw a map, I guess I should have done that earlier. So we've got Alaska, Canada, the United States here. Let's go ahead and go down to South America. In there. And we go there, and then over here is Europe. We've got Spain and Africa. We're going to make it look a little more like this, right there. So you have these winds that are coming from the east off the coast of Africa. And this is what creates the path for hurricanes when they form. That's where we get to the hurricanes. And you can see that the hurricanes, as they form off the coast of Africa, the winds are pushing in this direction. And what's interesting is a lot of times they come up and then they get into the westerlies, and we'll go up here where it's colder. So down here, the hurricanes, lots of warm water. They feast on that warm water, and they get bigger and stronger. And then they come here, and they either hit the United States, and you can see why Florida is a prime target, as well as Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina. All these are areas that the hurricanes can come into and hit. And so that's why hurricanes move the way they move, is because they have a steering current. And these are the trade winds, and the westerlies are the big global scale, big scale winds that kind of push things around. And so we're looking at storms that travel this way for us, and the hurricanes travel this way in through the mid-Atlantic and the South Atlantic in those areas. Well, not the South Atlantic, that's down here. But so that is an answer to that question. The thing I want to point out here is that when you ask one question, what does it do? It opens up a whole different question. And then that question opens up more questions, and there's so many questions that need to be answered, and that's what we're going to try to do now. So if you have any questions, I know we've had some, and what I'm going to do is every episode I'm going to take one question and try to do a little demonstration and explain that question, but then I want to just open it up for people if you have questions, and let's see what we've got here. Maybe not. I've been told we have just 3 minutes, but let's go up here, and I don't. All right. Well, one of the questions I thought was really interesting was, these are those trade winds, and I don't want to hear myself, was about clouds. And the one that caught in the introduction, the one that caught my attention was, why are clouds white? That's one of the things actually I've been asked a number of times is, why are clouds white? Well, have you ever thought about what the color of the light is that comes from the sun? Well, think about that. When you look up, well, you don't look ever directly at the sun, but you look outside and you can see that we have clouds, and there's different colors of clouds. If you look off through the clouds, you can see the tops of a nice bright white cloud. What that's doing is all of the ice crystals that form that cloud, because the temperatures are well below freezing, and there may be a few little droplets of water that are in it, but mostly this is going to be ice crystals. They reflect, they act like little mirrors. So all the light that's coming from the sun hits those ice crystals and bounces off of them. And the color of the light is white. And so that's why the clouds are white. And you can see if we go back to that image, there's other areas where the clouds are gray. And the reason why they're gray is because they're being shielded from the light. And so you can see that we have the light is coming down from the tops of the clouds and not able to make it to the bottom of the cloud. And that's why there's a gray color there. It's not as bright, it's not as white. And so we're seeing that right now. And you can actually see that we have a little precipitation out there. In fact, I'm going to go over here to the monitor. I think we're set up for it. And I can point to things. So here we go. There's the bright white. That's where it's reflecting all of the sun's light. These areas here, this is on the base of the cloud, or the bottom of the cloud, and the top of the cloud isn't letting all of the light come through. So you're getting just the diffracted light and the light that's able to make it through, and it's much darker, and you can actually see that it's snowing out there. In fact, we're starting to see some snowflakes in the camera coming up. So that, my friend, is what why we have clouds that are white. That's why we have the colors of the clouds. Now, what's really interesting is sometimes you can have some different colored clouds, especially at sunset. We can get a little bit later on, we can talk about that. That's a question for another day. Right now, we're going to have to sign off. I'm going to look through the questions that you're sending in to me, and we'll pick one or a few of them, and we'll try to answer those questions. And make sure you stay tuned. We'll be back here tomorrow at 10:15, and we'll get to those questions. Hope you have a wonderful day, and keep on learning.